Scholars refer to the four-letter name of God, Yahweh, as the Tetragrammaton. It is commonly believed that the name of God, which appears over 6,000 times in ancient Hebrew manuscripts, was no longer in use during the first century. Rather, with the translation of the Greek Old Testament, known as the Septuagint, the name of God was replaced with the Greek word Kyrios. It's believed that the Jews had stopped using the name and instead used the word Adonai when speaking the name of God. The Encyclopedia Britannica explains. After the exile, 6th century BC, and especially from the 3rd century BC on, Jews ceased to use the name Yahweh. While this may be a commonly accepted belief about the Tetragrammaton, textual evidence suggests a different truth. Before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest known complete Old Testament manuscripts were Greek, dating from the 4th century AD. Two renowned complete Greek Bibles are the Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus. In both of these famous codices, written after the time of Constantine, the name of God does not exist. Rather, in all uses, the name is replaced with the Greek surrogate Kyrios. While these are the oldest complete versions of the Greek Old Testament, they're not the oldest manuscripts. Some partial Old Testament manuscripts and fragments exist from the 2nd and 3rd century as well. In these documents, as with the 4th century codices, the name of God is not present, but rather the Greek surrogate Kyrios had replaced the name. It's also noteworthy to mention that there are no extant New Testament manuscripts from the 1st century. There are later 2nd and 3rd century New Testament manuscripts that have been found, but no 1st century ones. And as with the Old Testament Greek manuscripts, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, cannot be found in any of these surviving New Testament manuscripts. However, extant Old Testament manuscripts dating from the 1st century and earlier tell a different story. In fact, in all extant manuscripts and fragments of Old Testament writings from the 1st century or earlier, the Tetragrammaton in some form was being used. Textual evidence suggests that the use of the Greek word Kyrios did not begin replacing the name until the 2nd century. In the 1st century Old Testament manuscripts that have been discovered, the name of God is written in 3 different ways. In Herodian Hebrew, Aramaic script of that era, a more ancient Paleo-Hebrew script, or in some instances rendered in the Greek by the letters iao. In all of the Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts discovered around the Dead Sea, the Hebrew name of God is present, written in Herodian Hebrew Aramaic-style script as YHWH. These manuscripts date between 100 BC and 70 AD. In some instances, the main body of the text is written in Herodian Hebrew script, but the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, is written in the more ancient Paleo-Hebrew. There were also a few Greek manuscripts discovered around the Dead Sea Scrolls. One such manuscript pictured here is from the book of Habakkuk. In this beautiful text, dated at the turn of the Common Era, the words are all in Greek, except when it comes to the Tetragrammaton. The name of God is not written in Greek, but rather it's written in the Paleo-Hebrew script. And from Cave 4, manuscript 4Q120, is a fragment of Leviticus 4:17. In this Greek manuscript, dated to 1 BC, the name of God is written as a Greek rendering as Iao. In his book, The Complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English, author Giza Vermes writes, the tetragram, the divine name Yahweh, is rendered semi-phonetically as Iao and is not replaced, as was customary later, by the Greek Kyrios, or Lord. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not the only 1st century manuscripts discovered. In the deserts of Egypt from the Oxyrhynchus collection, a few 1st century Old Testament manuscripts were discovered. One such manuscript is pictured here, a Greek text from the book of Job, dated to around 50 AD. As with the Habakkuk scroll found at Qumran, in this first century Greek Old Testament, the name of God is not replaced with the Greek word kurios, but rather the name of God appears in Paleo-Hebrew script. Scholars and paleographers are aware that manuscripts from the first century and earlier do not use the surrogate kurios for the name of God. This practice does not show up until codices of the 2nd century. So what does this mean for the Bible students interested in a study of God's name? The evidence suggests that Old Testament scriptures used by Jesus and the disciples most likely contained the name of God. For instance, in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus went to the synagogue in Nazareth and read from the scroll of Isaiah, the Tetragrammaton could have been present. And when Philip met the eunuch from Alexandria in Acts 8, and he was reading from the scroll of Isaiah, this manuscript most likely contained the name of God. And when Paul reasoned with the Bereans out of the scripture in Acts chapter 17, these disciples very likely had a rendering of Yahweh, either in Paleo-Hebrew script, Herodian Aramaic, or in the Greek rendering semi-phonetically as Iao. You see, all of these New Testament records took place before 70 AD, and there is no textual evidence that the Greek word kurios, translated into the English as Lord, was being replaced as a replacement for the Tetragrammaton until the 2nd century AD. May we continue to search for truth and find the knowledge of Yahweh. May we be diligent to uncover hidden truths so that the name of God is no longer a secret, but that it may be declared among the nations.